The quiet struggle. The sun hovered high over Buckingham Palace, casting its oppressive heat over the iconic stone structure and the assembled crowd. A sea of tourists surged against the metal gates, phones aloft and chattering in a dozen languages, as the ceremonial changing of the guard began. Among the imposing figures of the royal guards, Sergeant Marcus Williams stood resolute at his post. His dark skin gleamed under the heat, the crimson of his uniform vibrant against the stark black of his bearskin cap. Sergeant Williams was one of the few black royal guards serving at the palace, a rarity in an institution steeped in centuries of tradition. Though Marcus had faced challenges in his role, he bore them with unwavering professionalism. Today, however, felt different. The oppressive heat seemed to echo the weight of his thoughts, drawing him back to the sacrifices he had made for this post. It was a dream realized at great cost, not just for himself but for his family, who had cheered him on with quiet pride when he donned the uniform for the first time. As the marching band struck up a familiar tune, Marcus tuned into the disciplined rhythm of his own breathing. He had perfected the art of tuning out distractions, the heat, the stares, the occasional rude comment from tourists who didn't respect the ceremonial solemnity. But the sharp voice of a woman cut through the air like glass shattering. "Hey, you with the hat. Smile for the camera, will you?" she shouted, her tone dripping with mockery. Marcus remained as still as the statue nearby, his gaze fixed on the distance. A flicker of irritation passed through him, but he maintained his composure. In his training, they had taught him to embody stillness, to be a living monument to duty and discipline. Ignoring the taunts was part of the job. The woman, undeterred by his lack of response, leaned against the fence and laughed with her companions. Her blonde hair caught the sun as she gestured theatrically. "What's the point of all this pomp if they can't even acknowledge us? I bet he doesn't understand a word I'm saying." Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Marcus clenched his jaw beneath his neutral expression. He had encountered racists before, but this woman was relentless. Her voice grew louder, and her words cut deeper. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue, soldier boy," she jeered, cupping her hands around her mouth. "Or are you just too scared to speak?" Marcus's mind raced, the years of training battling the growing storm inside him. He thought of his father's words when he first earned his post. "Hold your head high, son. You're part of history now." He had promised himself that he would honor that legacy, but moments like this tested his resolve. The woman's taunts escalated, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is what they call diversity, huh? Ridiculous. Tradition ruined by a cheap imitation." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Some glared at her in disapproval, while others awkwardly shifted their attention back to their phones, unwilling to engage. Marcus's fellow guards, stationed at their posts, stood equally impassive. They, too, had been trained to ignore provocations. The woman's young nephew tugged on her sleeve. "Aunt Lisa, maybe we should go. The guard looks mad." Marcus heard the boy's voice and resisted the urge to glance his way. His focus remained steady, his grip on the bayonet rifle firm. "Nonsense, Daniel," the woman replied with a sneer. "He's not mad. He's a statue, see?" She waved a hand theatrically in front of Marcus, as if daring him to react. The boy looked uncomfortable, glancing at Marcus with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What if he moves, though? What if he gets angry? Lisa laughed cruelly. "Don't be silly. They're trained not to. He's just a mannequin in a funny costume." Marcus's grip on his weapon tightened ever so slightly. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat reminding him of the thin line he had to walk. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to provoke him. But this time, something felt different. The woman wasn't just mocking him. She was mocking everything he stood for. Suddenly, she reached through the fence and flicked at his boot. The contact was brief, but it was enough to send a ripple of shock through the nearby crowd. Gasps echoed as Marcus's head turned slightly, his gaze locking on hers for the briefest moment. A hush fell over the crowd. "Well, would you look at that?" Lisa said smugly, raising her phone to capture the moment. "The statue does move." The boy tugged on her sleeve again, his voice quieter this time. "Aunt Lisa, stop. I don't like this." Marcus's jaw tightened, his breathing steady but shallow. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not here. Not now. But as Lisa's taunts continued, his resolve began to fray. The oppressive heat, the years of silent endurance, and the humiliation of the moment bore down on him like a storm gathering strength. And then it happened. Lisa reached through the fence again, this time slapping Marcus lightly on the cheek. It wasn't hard, but it was deliberate. The sound was enough to echo faintly in the tense silence. The crowd gasped. Phones shot up, capturing the moment in real time. Marcus's head turned slightly toward her, his eyes locking onto hers with a piercing intensity. For the first time, he broke protocol. His voice, calm but commanding, cut through the stunned silence. "Madam," he said, his tone as sharp as the edge of his bayonet. "Step back. Now." The authority in his voice sent a shockwave through the crowd. Even Lisa froze, her smug expression faltering as she took a step back. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. A line crossed. The air seemed to crackle with tension as the moment lingered, the crowd holding its collective breath. Lisa blinked, her bravado faltering under Marcus's commanding glare. The sharpness of his words had caught her off guard, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. The silence that followed was a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. All eyes were on Marcus, standing tall and resolute, the weight of centuries of tradition behind him. Yet within that weight, Marcus felt the burden of his own humanity. His heart pounded, his palms damp within his pristine white gloves. The years of discipline he had mastered were being put to the ultimate test. Lisa, ever defiant, quickly recovered. Her lips curled into a smirk as she gestured to the crowd with exaggerated flair, her voice dripping with mock indignation. "Did you hear that? The royal guard speaks. Someone alert the queen," she said, laughter punctuating her words. Some in the crowd chuckled nervously, unsure whether to side with her brazenness or Marcus's quiet dignity. But most remained silent, their discomfort palpable as they witnessed her antics. Marcus's piercing gaze never wavered, but internally his resolve teetered on the edge. He had encountered countless provocateurs before, but never one who had crossed the sacred boundary of physical contact. The slap wasn't just an insult, it was a desecration of everything he stood for. Lisa's nephew, Daniel, tugged on her sleeve once more, his young face etched with concern. "Aunt Lisa, please stop. He's really mad now. Let's just go." "Mad?" Lisa scoffed, glancing over her shoulder at the boy. "He's a guard. He's not allowed to get mad. Isn't that right, soldier?" She leaned closer to Marcus, her voice dropping into a mocking whisper. "You're nothing but a glorified ornament, standing there pretending to be important." The words were like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper into Marcus's composure. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but the tension in his posture betrayed the storm raging within him. He could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on him, judging, waiting for him to falter. Among the spectators, an elderly woman in a sun hat stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation. "Enough. Leave him alone, you vile woman. He's doing his duty, and you should be ashamed of yourself." Her words drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd, emboldening others to voice their disapproval. "Yeah, let the man do his job," someone shouted. "Show some respect." Lisa turned to face the growing dissent, her cheeks flushing with a mix of anger and embarrassment. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, her voice rising above the crowd. "Respect? For what? Standing there like a statue while we pay their salaries. This is my right as a taxpayer," she retorted, her words sharp and unapologetic. The crowd grew restless, their frustration with Lisa bubbling to the surface. Marcus could sense the shift, the collective mood turning against her. Yet he remained rooted in place, his discipline preventing him from engaging further. He had been trained to endure, to embody restraint in the face of adversity. But then, Lisa made a move that shattered the fragile boundary between provocation and outright hostility. With a defiant sneer, she reached through the fence once more, grabbing the strap of Marcus's bayonet rifle. The motion was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to trigger an instinctive response. Marcus's training kicked in, his hand shooting out to deflect her grasp. The interaction lasted only a second, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the crowd. Gasps erupted, followed by a flurry of foam cameras capturing the moment. Lisa stumbled back, her face a mix of shock and indignation. "He touched me," she shrieked, her voice rising above the cacophony. "Did you see that? He attacked me." The crowd erupted into chaos, voices clashing as people debated what they had just witnessed. Some sided with Lisa, their faces twisted with outrage, while others rushed to Marcus' defense, their voices rising in a chorus of condemnation against her behavior. "Are you serious? You grabbed his rifle first," one man shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at Lisa. "Leave him alone," yelled another, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's just doing his job." Amid the chaos, Marcus stood immobile, his mind racing. The slap, the taunts, the grab. Each act had pushed him closer to the breaking point, but it was Lisa's accusation that cut the deepest. To be accused of aggression, to have his integrity questioned, was a blow to the core of his identity. Before Marcus could process the situation, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "What's going on here?" The crowd parted as Major Robert Ellsworth approached, his towering figure commanding attention. His polished uniform gleamed in the sunlight, a testament to his rank and authority. He scanned the scene with a practiced eye, his gaze landing on Marcus, then Lisa. Lisa, sensing an opportunity, immediately launched into a tirade. "This man assaulted me," she cried, pointing an accusatory finger at Marcus. "All I did was try to take a picture, and he grabbed me. It's completely unacceptable." Major Ellsworth turned to Marcus, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Williams, is this true?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. "No, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "She reached through the fence and grabbed my rifle. I deflected her hand. That's all." Before Major Ellsworth could respond, the elderly woman in the sun hat stepped forward. "That's not what happened," she said firmly. "I saw the whole thing. That woman has been harassing him for the past 10 minutes, and she slapped him first. She's the one who crossed the line." Her testimony was met with murmurs of agreement from the crowd, several people nodding and voicing their support. "She's lying," Lisa shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "They're all lying." Major Ellsworth raised a hand, silencing the crowd. His gaze swept over the gathered spectators, his voice calm but commanding. "If anyone has video evidence of what happened, please step forward now." Several people immediately raised their phones, their screens displaying recordings of the incident. Major Ellsworth reviewed the footage in silence, his expression growing darker with each passing second. When he finally looked up, his gaze was sharp and unyielding. "Madam," he said, his voice cold and authoritative, "it is clear from the evidence that you are the one at fault here. Your behavior is not only disrespectful, but a violation of palace protocol." Lisa's face turned pale, her bravado crumbling under the weight of his words. She stammered, searching for a retort, but none came. Major Ellsworth turned to Marcus, his expression softening slightly. "Sergeant Williams, you've shown remarkable restraint under extreme provocation. You acted within the bounds of your training, and for that, I commend you." Marcus nodded, his posture stiff, but his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and pride. The validation from his superior was a balm to the wounds inflicted by Lisa's actions. The major gestured to a nearby security officer. "Escort this woman off the premises," he ordered. She is no longer welcome here. The officer stepped forward, taking Lisa by the arm. She protested loudly, her voice fading as she was led away, the crowd parting to let them pass. Daniel hesitated, glancing back at Marcus with wide, uncertain eyes, before reluctantly following his aunt. As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of approval and admiration filled the air. Marcus remained at his post, his gaze fixed straight ahead, but inside he felt a profound sense of vindication. He had stood his ground, upheld his duty, and weathered the storm. Yet, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The events of the day had ignited something deeper, a conversation about respect, tradition, and the quiet strength it took to endure. And though he stood alone, he knew he wasn't invisible anymore. The fallout. The palace grounds began to clear as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Tourists filtered out, their chatter echoing faintly in the distance, but for Marcus, the day's events were far from over. Though he remained composed at his post, his mind churned with the aftermath of what had unfolded. He glanced to his left, where Major Ellsworth stood speaking to another officer. Their faces were set in serious expressions, and though Marcus couldn't hear their conversation, he could sense its gravity. His grip tightened slightly on his bayonet rifle. The words of the crowd, the accusations hurled by Lisa, and the validation from the witnesses all blended into a cacophony in his head. He had stood his ground, upheld his duty, but the incident felt like a fracture in the carefully maintained facade of his role. At last, Major Ellsworth approached. His footsteps were measured, his face unreadable. Marcus braced himself, his heart pounding in his chest, despite his outward calm. "Sergeant Williams," the major began, his voice low but firm. "You're relieved from duty for the remainder of the day. Report to my office in 1 hour. We need to discuss today's events." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside him. As Ellsworth walked away, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. The weight of the day pressed down on him, but he knew the real challenge lay ahead. Public confrontations rarely ended cleanly, especially in an age where every moment was captured and dissected online. Even with witnesses and video evidence on his side, Marcus understood the precarious nature of his position. 1 hour later, the meeting. Marcus arrived at the small administrative office tucked within the palace grounds, his uniform crisp and his demeanor stoic. Major Ellsworth sat behind a large oak desk, flanked by 2 other officers, Captain Diana Hughes, a seasoned and sharp-eyed woman known for her no-nonsense approach, and Lieutenant Mark Bennett, a younger officer with a reputation for being meticulous. "Take a seat, Sergeant," Ellsworth said, gesturing to the chair in front of the desk. Marcus obeyed, sitting straight-backed and alert. He knew the importance of these moments, how even the slightest misstep in demeanor could influence perceptions. Ellsworth folded his hands on the desk and fixed Marcus with a steady gaze. "I've reviewed the footage and spoken with several witnesses. It's clear that the woman's behavior was not only inappropriate but provocative. However," he let the word hang in the air, heavy with implication. "Your response, though measured, has raised questions." Captain Hughes leaned forward, her sharp eyes scrutinizing Marcus. "We understand the provocation you faced, Sergeant," she said, her tone even. "But breaking protocol, even under extreme circumstances, is a serious matter. The integrity of the Royal Guard depends on our ability to remain composed and disciplined at all times." "I understand, Ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. "However, I believe there are limits to what we should be expected to endure. Her actions, slapping me, grabbing my rifle, were direct violations of both protocol and personal boundaries." Lieutenant Bennett spoke next, his voice measured but tinged with curiosity. "Sergeant, in your opinion, did the situation escalate because of her actions, or do you believe there was an opportunity to de-escalate earlier?" Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. "I believe the situation escalated because of her persistent provocations, sir," he said. "I maintained my composure as long as possible, but her physical contact, first the slap, then the grab, crossed a line. My response was instinctive, rooted in my training to protect my equipment and myself." Ellsworth nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Your training emphasizes restraint, Sergeant. Yet, given the circumstances, your actions were understandable. Still, this incident has drawn attention, and not just within these walls. Videos of the confrontation have already begun circulating online." At this, Marcus felt a twinge of anxiety. The digital age had a way of magnifying moments, reducing nuance to headlines and soundbites. He knew the narrative could easily be twisted, despite the evidence in his favor. Captain Hughes leaned back in her chair, her expression softening slightly. "We're not here to punish you, Marcus. But this situation is delicate. The palace has a reputation to uphold, and incidents like this can be problematic." Ellsworth interjected. "For now, you're on administrative leave pending further review. We'll handle the public relations side of this, but I suggest you take this time to reflect and prepare for whatever comes next." Marcus nodded, his face a mask of professionalism, though inside he felt a swirl of emotions, relief, frustration, and a simmering sense of injustice. "Understood, sir." The online firestorm. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment, staring at his phone. Notifications flooded in faster than he could process them. Videos of the incident had gone viral, with headlines ranging from "Racist Tourist Harasses Royal Guard" to "Royal Guard Breaks Protocol in Shocking Confrontation." The comments were a battleground of opinions, with some praising Marcus for his restraint and others criticizing him for breaking protocol. He scrolled through the comments, his chest tightening with each polarized opinion. Finally, someone stands up to these entitled tourists. "A disgrace to the uniform. He should have kept his cool. Why is no one talking about how she slapped him first? The royal family needs to address this racism ASAP." Marcus set the phone down, his hands trembling slightly. He had always known his role came with scrutiny, but this was something else entirely. His private life had been thrust into the spotlight, and he wasn't sure how to navigate the storm. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he was surprised to see Daniel standing there, clutching his toy soldier. "Hi, sir," the boy said timidly, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Daniel," Marcus asked, his surprise evident. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "My aunt. She's at the police station," Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go." Marcus sighed, stepping aside to let the boy in. As Daniel sat on the couch, fidgeting with his toy, Marcus felt a pang of sympathy. The boy was caught in a situation far beyond his understanding, and it wasn't his fault. "Why are you here, Daniel?" Marcus asked gently, sitting across from him. Daniel hesitated, his small hands gripping the toy tightly. "I wanted to say sorry," he said at last, his voice trembling, "for throwing peanuts at you, and for everything my aunt did. She's not a good person, but I didn't know how to stop her." Marcus studied the boy, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Despite everything, Daniel was just a child trying to make sense of a world filled with complexities he couldn't yet grasp. "It's okay, Daniel," Marcus said finally, his tone softening. "What matters is that you're here now, and you're trying to do the right thing. That takes courage." As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself talking to Daniel about the importance of respect, kindness, and standing up for what's right. In the boy, he saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to shape a better future, even in the face of adversity. The reckoning. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the skies themselves mirrored the weight in Marcus's chest. News outlets, blogs, and social media platforms were ablaze with discussions about the confrontation at Buckingham Palace. The incident had become a flashpoint for conversations about race, tradition, and the role of the royal guard in modern society. Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, the aroma of coffee wafting through the air as he stared at his phone. Headlines flooded his feed. Royal Guard confronts racist tourist. A breaking of tradition or necessary stand. Buckingham Palace responds to viral incident. Calls for calm and review. Decorum versus dignity. When does the line get crossed? Everywhere, it seemed, people were debating the events of the previous day. Some saw Marcus as a hero, standing up against blatant racism. Others accused him of compromising the image of the Royal Guard. The polarization of opinions was dizzying. A soft knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Setting his mug down, Marcus opened the door to find Major Ellsworth standing there, flanked by Captain Hughes. Their presence was a surprise, their serious expressions only adding to the unease that had settled over him. "Major, Captain," Marcus greeted, stepping aside to let them in. Ellsworth wasted no time. "Sergeant Williams," he began, his voice firm but not unkind, "we're here to discuss the palace's response to the incident." Marcus gestured to the small living room, offering them seats. Hughes sat gracefully, while Ellsworth remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "The palace has decided to issue a public statement addressing what happened," Ellsworth continued. "We've reviewed all the footage, and there's no question that you acted with restraint given the circumstances. However," he paused, glancing at Hughes, who picked up the thread. "However, this incident has shown a spotlight on the Royal Guard in a way we weren't prepared for," Hughes said. "The media frenzy is intense, and there are calls for greater accountability, not just for tourists behaving badly, but for how we train our guards to handle these situations." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "And what does that mean for me?" Ellsworth's expression softened. "It means you'll need to decide how you want to move forward, Sergeant. We can handle this as an internal matter, letting the story fade over time. Or you can take a more visible role in addressing the broader issues this incident has brought to light." Marcus frowned, unsure of what they were suggesting. "A visible role? What does that entail?" Hughes leaned forward, her tone earnest. "You'd speak publicly about your experience, not just about what happened, but about the challenges you face as a black man in the Royal Guard. It's an opportunity to advocate for change, to highlight the need for better protections and training for guards in the face of increasing public scrutiny." The weight of her words settled over Marcus. He had joined the Royal Guard out of a sense of duty, a desire to uphold tradition and serve his country. But now he was being asked to step into a role he hadn't anticipated, a voice for something greater. "And if I decline?" he asked quietly. Ellsworth's gaze was steady. "If you decline, we'll respect that. Your record will remain untarnished, and you'll have the opportunity to return to duty once the dust settles. But the public conversation will continue, with or without your input." The choice was clear, yet fraught with complexity. To speak out would be to expose himself further, to invite both praise and criticism. But to stay silent felt like a missed opportunity, a chance to turn personal pain into meaningful progress. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. A boy's plea. Later that day, as Marcus mulled over the decision, he heard another knock at the door. This time, it was Daniel, clutching the same toy soldier as before. The boy's face was somber, his eyes downcast. "Hi, sir," Daniel said softly, stepping inside when Marcus gestured for him to enter. I wanted to talk to you." Marcus sat across from him, noting the boy's nervousness. "What's on your mind, Daniel?" The boy fidgeted with the toy in his hands, his small fingers tracing its edges. "I wanted to say sorry again," he began, his voice trembling. "Not just for what I did, but for what my aunt did. She's always angry, always saying mean things about people. I didn't know it was wrong before, but now I do." Marcus's chest tightened at the boy's words. Daniel was a child, caught in the crossfire of his aunt's prejudice and his own innocence. "You're learning, Daniel," Marcus said gently. "That's what matters." Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with determination. Do you think people will ever stop being like her? Will they ever stop hating? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as he considered his response. "I don't know, Daniel," he admitted. "But I do know that change doesn't happen on its own. It takes people standing up, speaking out, and showing others a better way." The boy nodded, his small hands gripping the toy soldier tightly. "You should tell people that," he said earnestly, "so they can see what's right." Marcus was struck by the simplicity of Daniel's words. The boy, in his youthful innocence, had articulated the very choice Marcus had been wrestling with. To speak out wasn't just about himself. It was about setting an example, about paving the way for a future where boys like Daniel wouldn't have to question whether hatred was inevitable. A public stand. 2 days later, Marcus stood at a podium in a small press room within the palace. The event had been hastily arranged, a response to the media frenzy. Cameras clicked incessantly as reporters jostled for position, their notebooks poised and ready. Major Ellsworth and Captain Hughes stood nearby, their presence both reassuring and symbolic. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself as he faced the sea of expectant faces. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "My name is Sergeant Marcus Williams, and I am proud to serve as a member of the Royal Guard." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The incident that occurred earlier this week was not just about a single confrontation. It was about something much deeper, a reflection of the challenges we face as individuals and as a society. Marcus spoke candidly about the harassment he had endured, about the discipline and restraint demanded of him, and about the broader implications of the incident. He didn't shy away from addressing the issues of racism and disrespect that had come to the forefront. "As members of the Royal Guard, we are symbols of tradition and service," he said. "But we are also human. And as humans, we deserve respect, just as we are expected to show respect to others." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Marcus felt the tension ease slightly as he continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "This is an opportunity for growth, for the palace, for the public, and for all of us as individuals. We must hold ourselves accountable, not just for our actions, but for the values we uphold." When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Reporters shouted questions, but Marcus stepped back from the podium, signaling that he had said all he needed to say. Ellsworth and Hughes nodded at him, their expressions a mix of pride and respect. A new beginning. As Marcus walked away from the press room, he felt a sense of relief and resolve. He had taken a stand, not just for himself, but for every member of the Royal Guard, and for the values they represented. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but Marcus was ready to face it. In the days that followed, the public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Messages of gratitude poured in from around the world, and the palace announced new initiatives to address the issues raised by the incident. For Marcus, it was a reminder that even the smallest actions could create ripples of change. And as he returned to his post at Buckingham Palace, his head held high, Marcus knew that he wasn't just a guard anymore. He was a symbol, not of tradition alone, but of progress, resilience, and the quiet power of standing tall in the face of adversity. Facing the storm. The aftermath of Marcus's public address reverberated far beyond Buckingham Palace. The speech, raw and heartfelt, struck a chord with many. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #RespectTheGuard and #ChangeTheHellas, sparking global conversations about respect, race, and the evolving role of institutions in modern society. But not all reactions were positive. As Marcus resumed his duties, he became acutely aware of the scrutiny he was under. Every step, every movement, every interaction was watched more closely than ever before. For some, he was a hero, proof that standing against injustice could bring about meaningful change. For others, he was a lightning rod for controversy, accused of tarnishing the stoic reputation of the Royal Guard. The letters, It started with small notes delivered to his apartment. At first, they were messages of support. "Thank you for speaking up. You're an inspiration to so many. I visited Buckingham Palace last year and was so impressed by the guards. Hearing your story made me admire you even more." But as his story gained more attention, the tone of some letters shifted. "You've ruined centuries of tradition. The Royal Guard isn't supposed to have a voice. Stay silent and do your job. You're not a hero. You're a disgrace." Marcus read each letter, both the kind and the cruel, with the same quiet determination. The support fortified him, while the criticism reminded him of the long road still ahead. One letter, however, stood out. Written in a child's uneven handwriting, it read, "Dear Mr. Guard, my name is Sophie and I'm 8 years old. My mommy showed me your video because she said you are brave. I think you're brave too. I want to be like you when I grow up. Do you think I can be a guard like you someday? Love, Sophie." The simplicity of the letter brought a smile to Marcus's face. Sophie's words reminded him of why he had spoken out in the first place, not for accolades or validation, but for the people watching, especially the young ones like Sophie, who deserve to grow up in a world shaped by courage and respect. The incident at the gates. One afternoon, as Marcus stood at his post, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Daniel, clutching his toy soldier as always. But this time, he wasn't with his aunt. Instead, a woman Marcus assumed to be his social worker stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye on him. Daniel's eyes lit up when he spotted Marcus. He waved hesitantly, as if unsure whether the gesture was allowed. Marcus remained still, adhering to protocol, but the slight relaxation in his posture was enough to convey his acknowledgement. The boy approached the fence, his small hands gripping the metal bars. "Hi, sir," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. Marcus's gaze remained fixed ahead, but he responded quietly enough for Daniel to hear. "Hello, Daniel. Are you doing all right?" The boy nodded, his face serious. "I wanted to thank you again for helping me, and for what you said. It was really brave." The simplicity of Daniel's gratitude struck Marcus. The boy had endured his own challenges, living under the influence of an aunt who had openly displayed prejudice. Yet he was here, choosing to learn from the experience and move forward. Before Marcus could say more, a commotion erupted nearby. A man in the crowd, clearly agitated, began shouting. His voice was sharp, filled with anger and disdain. "What's the point of having these guards if they can't even stay silent? Turning the palace into a circus." The man's words cut through the air, drawing the attention of the crowd. Marcus remained stoic, his gaze unwavering, but the tension in the atmosphere was palpable. The man moved closer, his voice rising. "Is this what tradition has come to? Guards giving speeches, stirring up controversy. You're a disgrace to the uniform." The crowd murmured, some stepping forward to intervene. But the man's anger seemed to grow. He pointed directly at Marcus, his finger shaking with indignation. "You should be fired. You've turned this place into a spectacle." Daniel, watching the scene unfold, clenched his fists. His small voice, filled with surprising determination, rang out. "He's not a disgrace. He's brave." The man turned, startled, and stared at the boy. "What did you say?" Daniel stood his ground, his face red but resolute. "He's brave. He's a hero. And you're just being mean." The crowd shifted, some stepping forward to support the boy, while others murmured in agreement. The man, clearly taken aback by the boy's courage, faltered. His bluster deflated, and he muttered something under his breath before retreating into the crowd. Daniel turned back to Marcus, his eyes wide and shining. "I said what I thought was right," he whispered, almost as if seeking Marcus's approval. Marcus felt a swell of pride, though he remained motionless. "You did well, Daniel," he said softly. "Never be afraid to stand up for what's right." A turning point. The incident at the gates became another viral moment, with videos of Daniel's brave defense of Marcus spreading quickly. The public's response was overwhelmingly positive, with many praising the boy's courage and the example Marcus had set. But within the palace, the conversation was more complex. Major Ellsworth summoned Marcus to his office once again, his demeanor serious but not unkind. "Sergeant," he began, "it seems you've become something of a public figure." Marcus remained silent, unsure of where the conversation was heading. While this newfound attention brings challenges, it also brings opportunities, Ellsworth continued. The palace is considering implementing new training protocols for the Guard, focusing on how to handle public interactions in the digital age. Your input would be invaluable. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. The idea of contributing to systemic change was both daunting and exhilarating. It was a chance to ensure that no other Guard would have to endure what he had faced, to create a legacy of respect and dignity that would outlast the current headlines. "I'd be honored to contribute, sir," Marcus said at last. Ellsworth's expression softened, and he extended a hand. "Good. Your service, both on and off duty, continues to reflect the highest standards of this institution." A new role. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found himself navigating uncharted territory. He worked closely with palace officials to develop training programs, drawing on his experiences to craft guidelines for handling difficult situations. The programs emphasized empathy, professionalism, and resilience, with an emphasis on upholding the dignity of the Guard while addressing the realities of the modern world. Marcus's story became a rallying point for change, inspiring others to speak out and take action in their own spheres of influence. And though the road was far from easy, Marcus embraced his new role, knowing that his voice had the power to make a difference. The legacy of change. The morning sun rose over Buckingham Palace, its golden rays casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The air was crisp, carrying with it the promise of a new day. For Marcus, however, this day felt different. It wasn't marked by ceremony or spectacle, but by quiet reflection and a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. Weeks had turned into months since the confrontation that had upended his life and career. What began as a singular moment of defiance against prejudice had grown into something far greater, a movement toward accountability, respect, and reform within the palace's hallowed walls. The new training program. Inside a modest training hall on the palace grounds, Marcus stood before a group of fresh recruits, their faces a mix of nervous excitement and quiet determination. He had been invited to lead a new initiative, one that combined the traditional discipline of the Royal Guard with modern strategies for handling public interactions. "The uniform you wear represents centuries of tradition," Marcus began, his voice steady and resonant. "But it also represents something more. It's a symbol of resilience, respect, and service, not just to the crown, but to the people who look to us as stewards of those values." The recruits sat in rapt attention as Marcus continued, weaving his personal experiences into the training. He spoke candidly about the challenges he had faced, from the grueling expectations of his role to the racism he had endured both on and off duty. Yet, his words carried hope, a belief that change was not only possible but inevitable when individuals stood together. One of the recruits raised her hand. "Sergeant Williams, how do we balance the discipline we're taught with the need to stand up for ourselves when faced with disrespect?" Marcus smiled, appreciating the complexity of the question. "Discipline doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice," he said. "It means responding with integrity. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to speak up, not just for yourself, but for the principles we uphold." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over the recruits. Marcus saw in their faces the same sense of purpose he had carried when he first donned the uniform. It was a reminder that his story, though difficult, had paved the way for these young men and women to step into their roles with a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve. Daniel's new beginning. Later that day, Marcus visited a small community center on the outskirts of London. Inside, children laughed and played, their voices echoing through the brightly painted halls. Marcus spotted Daniel immediately, seated at a table with a group of other kids, his toy soldier still clutched in his hand. Daniel's face lit up when he saw Marcus. "Hi, sir," he called, running over to greet him. "Hi, Daniel," Marcus replied, crouching to meet the boy's eye level. "How are you settling in?" Daniel grinned, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's really nice here. The people are kind, and I've made lots of friends." The community center had become Daniel's new home after his aunt's custody was revoked. It was a place filled with care and compassion, where children like him could heal and thrive. Marcus had stayed involved in Daniel's life, becoming a mentor of sorts, offering guidance and encouragement as the boy navigated his new reality. Daniel held up his toy soldier. "I named him Marcus," he said with a shy smile, "because he's brave like you." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. "That's a good name," he said softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "But remember, bravery isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Daniel nodded solemnly, his small hands clutching the toy tightly. "I'll remember." The ceremony. A few weeks later, Marcus stood on the palace's grand steps, the sun high overhead. The occasion was a ceremony honoring the royal guard, recognizing their service and resilience. It was also an opportunity to unveil the new training program, a collaborative effort shaped by Marcus's input and the support of his colleagues. Dressed in full uniform, Marcus felt the familiar weight of the bearskin cap and crimson jacket. But today, the uniform felt lighter, imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. As the ceremony began, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Major Ellsworth stepped forward to address the crowd, his voice carrying across the assembled guests and press. "Today, we honor not only the traditions of the Royal Guard, but also the individuals who embody its principles in the face of adversity. One such individual is Sergeant Marcus Williams, whose courage and integrity have set a new standard for what it means to serve." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the courtyard. Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding as he approached the podium. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion of the moment. "Being a member of the Royal Guard is about more than standing watch. It's about embodying the values that define us as a nation: respect, dignity, and resilience." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "The incident that brought us here today was not just about me. It was about all of us, about how we treat one another, about the importance of standing up for what's right, and about the power of change." As he spoke, Marcus saw Daniel in the crowd, the boy's face glowing with pride. It was a reminder of why he had chosen to take a stand, why he had refused to remain silent. "We cannot change the past," Marcus concluded, "but we can shape the future. Together, we can ensure that the values we uphold are not just words, but actions that inspire generations to come." The applause that followed was deafening, a resounding affirmation of Marcus's journey and the impact of his actions. A quiet victory. That evening, Marcus stood outside the palace gates, the bustling city alive with activity around him. Tourists passed by, some stopping to admire the grandeur of the palace, others moving on without a second glance. Marcus watched them with a sense of peace, knowing that he had done his part to make this place, and the world, a little better. Beside him, Daniel stood holding his hand, the boy's toy soldier tucked safely in his pocket. "You think I could be a guard like you someday?" Daniel asked, looking up at Marcus with wide, hopeful eyes. Marcus smiled, his gaze softening. "I know you can, Daniel. And when you do, you'll make us all proud." As the sun set behind the palace, casting the city in a warm, golden glow, Marcus felt a quiet sense of victory. His journey had been difficult, but it had led him to this moment, a moment where the values he stood for were not just preserved but strengthened, paving the way for a brighter future. And in that moment, Marcus knew that his legacy was not just in the uniform he wore, but in the lives he had touched and the change he had inspired. The tides of change. As the evening deepened, Buckingham Palace gleamed under the city lights. Tourists gradually thinned out, replaced by the calm hush of the night. Marcus and Daniel lingered near the gates, the boy's hand still holding tightly onto his toy soldier as they watched the city come alive in its own quiet way. Marcus had always believed his role in the Royal Guard was about tradition, about discipline, stoicism, and endurance. But standing there with Daniel, he realized his journey had become something much more. He had not just upheld tradition. He had challenged it, expanded it, and made it more inclusive. The palace gates now felt less like barriers and more like bridges. The letter from the palace. 2 weeks after the ceremony, a crisp, official-looking envelope arrived at Marcus's door. The royal crest glinted in the corner, its presence alone enough to make Marcus pause. He set the envelope on his kitchen table and stared at it for a moment before carefully opening it. Inside was a formal letter, signed by none other than a representative of the royal household. Dear Sergeant Williams, on behalf of Buckingham Palace and the royal family, I extend our deepest gratitude for your exemplary service and your invaluable contributions to the Royal Guard. Your courage and composure during the recent incident brought to light the strength and integrity that our institution strives to represent. Furthermore, your role in shaping the new training programs has set a precedent for the Guard, ensuring that future generations will carry forward these lessons with pride and purpose. The Crown recognizes your efforts as a vital part of our ongoing commitment to modernization and inclusion. It is with great honor that we invite you to serve as the official liaison between the Royal Guard and the Public Relations Department. In this capacity, you will continue to uphold the Guard's values while helping bridge the gap between tradition and progress. We thank you for your service and hope you will accept this role as a continuation of your distinguished career. Sincerely, the Office of the Royal Household. Marcus read the letter twice, the weight of its words sinking in. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an acknowledgement of his impact, a validation of his journey. He sat back, exhaling deeply as he considered the opportunity. He had already decided to dedicate himself to fostering change, and this role seemed like the perfect next step. A final visit. Before making his decision official, Marcus felt a need to revisit the place where everything had begun. On a rare day off, he returned to the east gate of Buckingham Palace, the site of the confrontation with Lisa. It was quieter now, the usual throng of tourists replaced by a smattering of early visitors. As he stood there, a familiar voice called out to him. Turning, he saw the elderly woman who had defended him during the incident. She approached with a warm smile, leaning lightly on her cane. "I hoped I'd see you here again," she said. "You've done us all proud, young man." "Thank you," Marcus replied, a smile touching his lips. "Your support that day meant more than I can say." The woman waved a hand dismissively. "It was the least I could do. People like that woman, they thrive on silence. But you, Sergeant, you broke that silence. And look what's come of it." Her words stayed with him as they parted ways. He walked the grounds for a while longer, reflecting on how far he had come, not just as a guard, but as a person. The first day of a new role. On his first day as liaison, Marcus stepped into the palace's public relations office with a mixture of excitement and determination. The room was bustling with activity, teams of people strategizing, planning events, and managing public narratives. Captain Hughes greeted him warmly, her sharp eyes softened by genuine respect. "Welcome aboard, Sergeant Williams," she said, extending a hand. "Or should I say Mr. Williams now?" "Marcus is fine," he replied, shaking her hand with a smile. Over the next few hours, Marcus was briefed on his new responsibilities. He would be involved in crafting public statements, advising on cultural sensitivity, and acting as a bridge between the Guard and the public. His role would also include outreach programs to connect the palace with diverse communities, ensuring that the Guard's legacy reflected the breadth of the nation it served. By the end of the day, Marcus felt a sense of purpose that went beyond anything he had experienced before. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was the beginning of a legacy, one rooted in progress and possibility, an unshakable bond. That evening, Marcus visited Daniel at the community center. The boy greeted him with the same bright enthusiasm, holding up a drawing he had made. It depicted a soldier in a red uniform standing tall before the gates of Buckingham Palace. "It's you," Daniel said proudly, pointing to the drawing. "You're my hero." Marcus knelt beside him, his voice warm but firm. "And you're mine, Daniel. You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. That makes you a hero too." Daniel beamed, clutching the drawing to his chest. "When I grow up, I want to be just like you." "You'll be even better," Marcus said, ruffling the boy's hair. "And I'll be here to help you every step of the way." A legacy forged in resilience. As Marcus left the community center and walked into the cool evening air, he felt a profound sense of peace. His journey had taken him through trials he hadn't anticipated, but it had also given him a platform to create lasting change. The uniform he wore was no longer just a symbol of tradition. It was a reminder of the strength it took to uphold those traditions while carving out a path for progress. And as the lights of the city twinkled around him, Marcus knew one thing for certain. His story was far from over. It was a story of resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of standing tall in the face of adversity. A story that would inspire generations to come.